Our next speaker, one of the information architects, he's only 23 years old, and he's a legend. He's been, from the very beginning of what's happened out in Silicon Valley, he's been a star. Anyway, Clement.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. The topic that I want to talk about today is children, and I'm so uniquely qualified. It's a subject that it was actually very foreign to me 12 months ago. I'm not a parent, and I'm not an educator. I'm a designer. I've got 2 golden retrievers, and I treat them like children, but I don't think that counts here. I think my professional life as well as my personal life have very little interaction with children. So it makes me very uniquely qualified to talk about the subject of children. I think the thing that qualifies me as a subject expert on this subject is the fact that I was a kid once. So as with any design problem of understanding, I've started this about 12 months ago looking into the subject of children and having a beginner's mind on this. And that beginner's mind has to do is just about gathering as much information as I can possibly do. Reading journals, looking at books, looking at media, trying to understand how the media talks about children and how children are portrayed by the media. I think more importantly, trying to understand and talk to people about the subject. Doing the interviews with parents, teachers, and I think most importantly with children. And what I like to do today is to spend some time to share with this group that journey of discovery for someone who is not a parent. And what was interesting in doing my research and just looking at the material, there was very little material about the subject written by non-parents. So the discovery for me was the very fact that there is a context of understanding that has been created and be written by subject experts and not by novices. So what I like to do is to walk and share the group with some of the connections I've made along the way. I'd like to start off, and in providing context, I'd like to start off with a story about, and I think a story that we all have, and particularly in a room with overachievers like this. It's about how we all got to where we are today. Now, some of us were born as geniuses, the Nathans and the Larrys of the world. Someone like myself needs a little help. And I want to talk about that and put this into context as to how we got where we are, or at least how I got to where I am. I would not have been a designer were it not for Mr. Rand. It's not Paul Rand, the famous designer. It's a different Mr. Rand. It's a Walter Rand, my high school print shop instructor. And I had spent 2 years in his class learning how to run an offset press, a letter press, and learn how to strip films, learn how to type in a galley. And it's not what I learned those 2 years in his class, but more importantly, it was the fact that he gave me courage and also took interest in my studies, and most importantly, mentored me and believed in me. And in a strange way, he provided a haven, a safe haven for me when I was 13, 14 years old, when there was so much pressure to conform with the rest of the world. He provided a place for me after school so that I can tinker with my newfound interests and not be bothered with other kids to do the things that all the other kids were supposed to be doing that I have to be part of. So he gave me permission, and I think more importantly, and encouraged me to pursue a career in design. Later on, I did end up going to college, the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, just up the street from the Rose Bowl. And I'm not sure whether I was, and I think the first week was a pivotal point, and once again, were it not for Mr. Rand, I would not have been here at this, and I'll probably be a charter accountant at this point. My first instructor was an instructor known and and called with endearing terms as the drill sergeant. And my very first class was a rendering class, and the very first assignment was about drawing a cylinder. Well, what happened was that that instructor singled out my drawing as probably the worst drawing that he had ever seen in the history of the school. I was absolutely devastated. And I'm sure many of you have had some experience like that in the past. And I called Mr. Rand up and I said, I think I've made a mistake. I was like, no, try again. That education, I think, and that just one phone call made all the difference in the world for me to pursue this career called design. So in looking at this problem, or this issue about children, and trying to understand and provide a context with the perspective of a non-parent, I started this with a fuzzy goal. And that fuzzy goal was trying to understand the problem. Very often the ability to understand the problem is the problem. And I think for those who are parents, those who are working in the education sectors, who are teachers or politicians, think that they do have a subject, be the subject expert on the material, when in fact I'm not so sure. Where I started was, and I began with the simple premise that, and an assumption I think many of us do have, is the fact that children are citizens in waiting. And when well, at least when I start to look at the facts, I don't think that is the case. They can't vote, they can't lobby for themselves, and when something is wrong, they're not heard from unless it's something as horrible as Columbine. And when we do hear from them and just watch them play, and then as I start talking to them, I can't make out or understand what was it that was that they like or don't dislike. Chaos and confusion is a wonderful experience for them. Very different from the world that at least that I was brought up with. So who watches out? Who looks at this constituent? Is it just the parents? Is it just the educators? Or is it the social workers or politicians? So I just start paying attention to the media, and you'll soon have a pretty good idea what's going on. Or at least I found I had an epiphany or discovery. The way that we talk about this subject, children, is very much in sound bites, either as statistics or neatly packaged stories. And when you start to unbundle these stories, they present us with every issue of major concern for us as a people. Everything from violence, poverty, to education, to healthcare, to childcare, affirmative action, abuse, incest, welfare reform, you name it, the list goes on and on and on. The problem is huge and very difficult to understand. What was interesting was the fact that the discussion was very much about the problem and not about children. Many of the documentaries, newscasts, and the articles that I've read were very much focused on the problem and really not talking about children. So my understanding of children was incredibly limited and handicapped. So again, what is the problem? And as Ariana Huffington pointed out yesterday, it is as if we are two nations, that there are two nations in this country. And if we do believe that this is one country, we have to recognize that children are at risk. It's not the entrepreneurial risk I think the group is talking about here. And at least initially that's what I thought, oh good, entrepreneurial risk. It's a risk about life and death. And it's the kind of risk I don't think this group, none of us truly understands. And this group in particular, and I'm speaking for myself, we lead such insulated lives, and to understand what is at risk means it's very difficult. So as I was pouring through the statistics, 13% of every child in this country is at high risk. That's a statistic. It's meaningless to me when I don't have an understanding of what children is. When I looked into this, I realized it means that these children are not educated properly. They're sick, they're hungry, and they might not even have a home or parents to turn to. 13%. That's more than 1 person out of 10. 1 out of 10 kids will become a criminal, a drug addict, or die of an early age. That's astounding. Children is about 1/3 of the population of the United States, and about 1/3 of all children are being raised by a single parent. And nearly 1/3 of all children are living with parents who do not have a full-time job year-round. That's absolutely astounding. More statistic, but it's starting to give me a dimension as to what the problem is. 1 out of 5 children is growing up in poverty, and 1 out of 5 people waiting in a food line seeking help is a child. That's not right. That's not right. A child is killed by guns in this country every 2 hours. Every 2 hours. That's a classroom every 2 days. That's just more than what had happened at Columbine. We're producing and importing a gun into this country every 8 seconds. That's the length of time that we all took our Merrill Lynch poll. 8 seconds. When there are 200 million guns already in circulation in this country. So we are the richest nation on this planet. We're the first in the number of millionaires and billionaires, yet we're 17th in lifting our children out of poverty. No other industrializations treat their children as the poorest groups of citizens. Now, there are more statistics and which you can find in the book, but we don't have time here, and I like to get to the discovery that I've made. In trying to understand the problem, I've looked at how we've been looking at the problems, and I think we've talked about this all throughout the conference. I've looked into healthcare reform, welfare reform, education reform programs. I've read the story about chartered schools. I've read stories about how parents and teachers overcome the odds and the funding for key initiatives. But as John Doerr and Dean Kamen have demonstrated, there are solutions out there. And the problem is that they have not been scaled. The other thing that I found as an outsider and observer to this is the fact that we're easily distracted by the bureaucracy and the mechanics of trying to make these changes. So let's take, for instance, the welfare reform efforts that's been going on. The debate mostly was on policies, entitlement, and funding. We feel pretty good about making these progress in welfare reform and ending welfare as we know it, but I don't think we're ending poverty. And as we know, poverty is one of the risks in putting kids at high risk. So the problem has been very difficult to get the problem was very difficult to get my arms around. So I started to look, and partly it's because of the complexity of the problem. So for instance, when you start to look at education, hello. Oops. All right. So when you, or even curricular standards, we have to start thinking about what is right and what we need to put into place to help the child to have the proper foundation so they can get ready for school and for life for that matter. So that means that we have to provide good prenatal care so that they can be born, the children can be born as healthy as they can be. It also means health care, or have health care, so that they won't, that the children aren't sick and they can concentrate at school, a place to live. That's an important piece. Shelters should not be part of the experience of growing up in the United States. One out of 5 kids in this country is below the poverty line, and half of that is living in shelters. We also need to look at health care. People who work with children the most often in their early years we have to look at child care. People who work with children in their early years are being paid $13,000 annually. $13,000. That's like you can, and that's without benefits. So our tendency is to look at this problem, isolate it, and tackle them one at a time with programs, initiatives, studies, and the reallocation of resources. And very often children is really at the center of these discussions, and it's usually the problem that gets the most attention. So what does it take to get children back into the agenda of the discussion and have the issues become children-centric? And the more I've looked at the problem and the very fact that these are all statistics and these are just issues, how do I make that relevant and make it understandable to me? Because as soon as I can at least understand it, then I can at least provide and design that understanding. And I do believe the problem is that of mindset. And I think those of you who are parents, you already know the problem too well. People like myself who lead very fast, busy, and full lives have very little interaction with children and don't see their children. And when children are not part of your life, you don't, they're invisible. And when they're invisible, the problem is invisible. And it's someone else's problem, not mine. I used to think that that parents, educators, and social workers really knew what was best for children. And since my contact and knowledge is so limited, I should stay out of the way and support them financially. And that's it. I think and I soon realized, and I think the more I read and the more I talk to children, I realize that's not enough, and I was very wrong. The problem that I do see, and I think it's been articulated, is about poverty. Poverty leads to crime, and crime leads to violence, and there's a domino effect. But perhaps the discovery for me was the fact that there was a different kind of poverty. A poverty that does not appear in statistics, and that is the emotional poverty that exists in this country. And that emotional poverty is that of our time and our commitment. Our commitment as a society to provide children the right our commitment as a society to place children's priorities ahead of policies, careers, things, and of ourselves. So just listen to the rhetoric about the new economy. It's about commerce, it's about transactions and business, more, better, faster. Is that the message that we want our kids to learn? Everything is a target market, including kids that are barely walking. Consumer, and I myself, my entire career is very guilty of that. So, and consumerism is filling the void that should be filled by our time, our energy, and perhaps most importantly, our emotional commitments. If we want our kids to grow up to be honest and not be materialistic, we have to be honest and not materialistic ourselves. And because children in particular are watching us, That's how they take their cues on what they should be when they grow up. I don't think we have a children problem. We have an adult problem here. And this is a quote that I found, and this is a quote from James Baldwin. Children very seldom do what we tell them to, but they always do what we do. So we have to become better role models and pay attention. And is there more? Pay attention to the fact that we're mentors. It means making time and making yourself available to children, including someone like me. And I do feel, having gone through this experience of learning about the subject, I've been neglectful. I'm very guilty of just not paying attention. And hopefully, as I move forward, I will pay a little bit more attention. But paying attention is probably not enough. Children need people who believe in them. They need to be encouraged. They need to have someone to turn to when the parent is not able or available. And in order for kids to believe in themselves, someone has to believe in them first, just as Mr. Rand did in believing me and mentored me. So he made that emotional investment in me some 20 years ago. So I asked the group here, who encouraged you? Who helped you and believed in you some 10, 20 years ago? Isn't it time for the group to pass that gift to someone else now? In closing, oops, hold on. Well, all right, in closing. If each of us can be a Mr. Rand just for one child, and understand the importance of reaching out to other people's children, I think we'll make quite a difference. We'll make quite a difference. And if each one of us in this room make a commitment to mentor at least one other child that's not yours, we can have quite a profound effect on at least 900 kids in this world, and that's a pretty great start. Encourage others to do the same. And pretty soon, we'll have a movement to solve this problem that has stymied us. 12 months ago, I didn't see this as a problem myself, and that it was supposed to be left up to the experts. Well, I was wrong. As I saw this as a design problem, I hope some of you will see this as a management problem, and some of you will see this as a HR problem. Some of you hopefully will see this as a marketing problem and pay attention and get involved. What is it going to take for the group here to give up some of their time for children? I hope it doesn't take another Columbine. If not now, then when? If it's not us, then who? Thank you very much.
That was an unexpected speech. That was an unexpected speech. That was fantastic. That was the best speech I ever heard you give, too. That was incredible. That was very, very moving speech by Clement. I didn't expect that speech at all. I really didn't. That was a very moving speech. Thank you, Clement. Thank you.